Chapter 2. Finding Your Process. In the last chapter, we looked briefly at 6 steps of the writing process that sit at different positions on the writing spinner. In this chapter, we'll look in detail at each of these steps and see the part each one of them plays in your own writing process. For the sake of simplicity, I'm presenting them in a linear fashion here, but remember, you can start your process anywhere you want. Understand your purpose. When you sit down to write something, you need to understand in a very specific way what your purpose is. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with this piece of writing? At first glance, your purpose in writing might seem self-evident, and many times it is. If you're writing a note of congratulations, your purpose is to give the reader some well-deserved recognition for her accomplishment. If you're writing a condolence note, your purpose is to offer comfort to the reader. However, sometimes understanding your purpose is more complicated than it appears. If you don't have a clear idea of what you're trying to achieve, you can easily go astray. Let's say you're applying for a job, and you need to write a cover letter to accompany your resume. What is your purpose in that cover letter? You're trying to get a job, right? So isn't that the purpose behind the cover letter? That's your long-range goal. But can the cover letter get you hired? No, it can't. It's only a part of a much larger process that has many different components. Many elements go into the hiring decision: your resume, your references, and your performance during the interview, among others. So what specifically is your purpose in writing a cover letter to accompany a resume? The cover letter actually has 2 purposes: to encourage the reader to look carefully at your resume and to motivate the reader to call you for an interview. The horrifying truth is that the average hiring manager reviewing a pile of resumes spends about 10 seconds on each. If you can say something in your cover letter to pique your reader's interest, she will be much more likely to give your resume a serious look. The cover letter also gives you a chance to mention some things that don't appear on the resume, or to point out exactly how your experience makes you a perfect fit for the job. Just the kind of things that will make a hiring manager put your resume in the follow-up file, rather than the circular file. You can see then that there is a world of difference writing a cover letter with the thought, "My purpose is to get a job," versus thinking, "My purpose is to give my reader information that will encourage her to interview me." The second is more realistic, more focused, and actually much easier to write. Let's look at another example: the complaint letter or email. We're usually angry when we write a complaint, or at least disgruntled enough to devote the time to do it. But what's the purpose behind your message? It may just be to blow off steam, but if you want more than that, it's worth thinking carefully about what you're asking for. Do you want a refund? Do you want a replacement? Do you want an apology, an explanation, a recount, a redo? Once you identify your purpose, you can make a specific request of your reader. If you don't ask for what you want, how will the reader know? Remember the old saying, "Ask and ye shall receive"? It may not always be true, but you're much less likely to receive if you don't ask. Thinking specifically about your purpose helps you figure out what to say and how to say it. Interestingly, it also makes things easier on your reader. If you've ever been in a position where you had to review a stack of resumes, you know what a relief it is to read a cover letter that's thoughtful, well-written, and targeted for the position you're trying to fill. If you've ever been on the receiving end of a complaint, you know it's much easier to deal with a specific request for a remedy than simply to endure a page worth of angry abuse. Making things easier for your reader increases your chances of getting what you want. Thinking hard about your purpose is an excellent way to start your writing process. However, if you've started someplace else, for instance, if you've started by writing an outline or writing a draft, you can use this phase as a check-in. Review what you have so far and check to see if what you're working on really addresses the right purpose. Keep your purpose in mind when you're doing a final check, too. When you review your final draft, ask yourself if your purpose is clear and sensible to the reader, and if you've suggested to your reader a specific way to act on that purpose. Understand your reader. Every time you write, unless you're writing a personal journal, you're writing for an audience. You're directing your writing to specific readers. Sometimes your reader's needs and expectations will be clear. It's not hard, for instance, to imagine the needs and expectations of the reader of a condolence letter. The reader of a recipe or driving directions also has pretty straightforward needs. Some situations are more complicated, however, especially when you're asking your reader for something. Since your readers are the people who can grant or deny your wish, it's worth thinking hard about who they are, what their expectations are, and what they need from you. When you consider your readers, put yourself in their shoes. Ask yourself how you would respond if you were the person receiving this communication. Think from your reader's point of view. There are two key issues for you to consider as you think from your reader's point of view. Information, attitude. What kind of information should you give your readers? How much information do they have already, and what information do they need in order to make the decision or take the action you want from them? Imagine, for instance, that you're writing a letter of recommendation for someone who's applying to an MBA program. The reader is going to be looking for information that will convince him the candidate will perform well academically, has a good basic understanding of business, and will work well with other students in the program. If you're creating a sales pitch for a product, your reader will want to know exactly what that product can do and how it can address his needs. In a case like this, the information you include will depend on who you're targeting for the pitch. If you're trying to sell a software product, for instance, you'll likely select different information to present to an audience of IT professionals than to an audience of end users. The golden rule for selecting information is this: include enough of the right kind of information to get readers to do what you want them to do. Understanding your reader's potential attitude is also key to successful writing. How are your readers likely to respond? Will they be open and receptive? Defensive? Hostile? The importance of this question depends a lot on what you're writing. If you're writing a note of congratulations, for instance, you really don't have to worry about your reader's attitude. However, if you're writing a proposal that asks for funding and you know your reader is planning budget cuts, you can expect her attitude to be cautious or skeptical. If you're sending an email to an employee requesting a meeting about a performance problem, you can expect that your reader might be defensive, and you can tailor your tone accordingly. Thinking about information and attitude can help you anticipate any questions your reader might have. When you anticipate questions, you can include the answers to those questions in your document, thus saving yourself extra rounds of follow-up communication and, in the process, time. You might also choose to hold that information aside for now and simply be prepared when the questions actually arise. In either case, being forearmed about your reader's information and attitude, and hence her potential response, will help you do a better job. Even with writing tasks that seem very cut and dried, it's worth taking the time to think seriously about how your writing can best serve your reader's needs. Instructions are a good example. Writing instructions seems completely straightforward, but we've all been in the situation where those perfectly simple instructions were impossible to follow because an important step had been left out. In cases like this, the writer has taken for granted that the reader knows everything she does. Putting yourself in your reader's shoes can help ensure you do a careful job, even on a foolproof piece of writing. You can see by now that understanding your reader often works hand in hand with understanding your purpose. If you understand your reader, it's easier to write something that will help you achieve your purpose. Spending a few minutes at the beginning of the writing process thinking about your readers and their needs can help you get off on the right foot, but it's not etched in stone anywhere that you have to start this way. It's equally helpful to consider your reader a few times as you work your way through the writing process. In fact, I highly recommend you do so. Often that lost feeling you get when you're writing is a sign that you've lost your focus on your reader and you're starting to drift. Going back To consider your reader is a useful touchstone at any point in the process and an excellent place to check in just before you finalize your draft. Brainstorm your content. Get a grasp on your subject, and the words will follow. Cato, Roman statesman and writer. Brainstorming is traditionally the third step of the writing process. Once you've considered your purpose and your audience, you're ready to generate the content you need. Some pieces of writing are simple and straightforward. For instance, if you're writing to your child's teacher letting her know that your son will miss school because of a doctor's appointment, you probably won't have to work very hard to be sure your note is complete. However, many writing tasks are more complex, and it's worthwhile spending some time making sure you're including all the necessary content. Brainstorming is the process of compiling all the possible relevant content and putting it all down in one place, for use when you actually start to write. There are a few rules to observe in brainstorming. Don't worry, these rules make things easier for you, not harder. You may have come across these rules if you've ever participated in group brainstorming sessions at work or in school. Number 1. Try to come up with as many ideas as possible. If you focus on quantity rather than quality, your chances of generating useful pieces of content increase. The more the merrier. Number 2. Don't censor or criticize. When you're brainstorming, let your ideas flow freely. Now is not the time to judge your ideas, to decide this one isn't good or that one doesn't fit. Turn off that critical voice in your brain and just write down everything that comes to you. You can sort things out later. Number 3. Be open to unusual ideas. Don't be concerned if some of your thoughts seem off the mark. You may come up with some ideas that are totally unanticipated. One of these unusual ideas might prove to be your most useful point, or at least lead you in the direction of your most useful point. Let your imagination do its job. Number 4. Combine and improve ideas. If your ideas are flowing freely, you're likely to come up with some that overlap at least a little bit. Notice similarities and note them. The more you practice brainstorming, the better you get at it. In many people, the impulse to censor is very strong. There's a little voice in your head saying, "That's not very good," or "That's not interesting," or "That's not relevant." Learning to turn off that voice can be a challenge, but once you do it, or at least get it under control, you can use the whole force of your creativity in generating content for your writing project. Let's look at an example of how brainstorming can work. Say that you're creating a PowerPoint presentation to pitch a new software product your company has developed. You might brainstorm for a while and end up with a list like this. If you buy our software, you'll be more efficient. You'll save money. It's better than competing products. We offer great support. We can customize it for you. It's easy to use. It's going to be the leading software package in its category. More economical. Works on all different platforms. Easy to understand. Other companies in your industry are using it. Its main competitor has features that are useless. New version in the pipeline right now. Looking over this list, you can see that not all the information will be relevant to the presentation the writer is planning. Some of it is repetitive. Some of it is vague. For instance, exactly how does the product save the customer money, and how can it make the customer more efficient? However, this list is as complete as the writer could make it during this brainstorming session, and it provides her with an excellent basis for moving forward in the process and developing her slides. With a little editing and a little reorganizing, this list will become a strong first draft. As you brainstorm, it can be particularly helpful to think about the two phases of the writing process that we've already discussed, understanding your purpose and understanding your reader. If your purpose is to convince your reader to buy the new software, what kind of information could you include that would help in that regard? Remember, think from the point of view of your readers. What are they looking for in a software product, and why? What software are they using now, and how can your product improve their experience? What information will be the most persuasive to them? What information won't interest them in the least? These considerations can help feed your brainstorming process. Is brainstorming a good place to start your writing process? Absolutely. Many people start a writing project by brainstorming ideas. Sometimes getting everything down in a list helps writers organize their ideas and plan their project. But wherever you start your writing process, remember that brainstorming isn't over once you've written an outline, and it isn't even over once you've written a draft. It's a technique you can come back to as many times as you like, as many times as will be helpful to you. Say you've already written a first draft of the presentation, for instance. When you review what you've written, you might find areas that seem less complete or less convincing than they should. You might even remember an important piece of information that's missing altogether. That's the time to go back and brainstorm some more and then return to your draft with the new information you've developed. You might find the same thing happens when you write an outline. Some parts of the outline are more developed than others. If you think the imbalance is a problem, go back to the drawing board, brainstorm a little more, and fill in the blanks. You can return to this part of the spinner as many times as you need to, until you're comfortable that you have all the content you need. Organize. There are many different approaches to organizing a written document. In school, many of us learned a fairly rigid outline format, a format that involves Roman numerals, Arabic numerals, and letters of different sizes. This kind of outline format can be helpful because it offers a logical way to organize large quantities of information. However, most of what we write isn't long enough or complex enough to justify using such a formal outline, and trying to force our content into this format can be frustrating and unrewarding. The way we organize a document depends a lot on what kind of document it is and what our objectives are. If you're writing a set of instructions or driving directions, then a step-by-step outline makes sense. If you're describing an event that took place, you might organize chronologically. If you're trying to persuade someone, you might want to rank your reasons in order of importance, either beginning with the most important reason first or placing the most compelling reason last in order to end on the strongest possible note. If you're presenting pros and cons, you might group those together. Organizing most documents usually follows a simple logic. Working your way around the spinner, you may find that returning to a consideration of your reader can help you find the best way to organize your document. What do you think your reader expects? What kind of organization will be the most persuasive or the easiest for them to follow? As long as we're spinning the spinner, can you start your writing process with organizing before you've considered your purpose and your reader and before you've brainstormed the content you want to include? Absolutely, you can. In fact, organizing and outlining isn't a bad place to start. Doing the organizing first can help guide you as you brainstorm your ideas and content. Let's look at an example to see how this might work. Say you want to email your boss to recommend postponing an event you've been planning. Here's a quick outline you might throw together. Check. Let's postpone till May. Check. May would be better because we'd get a better turnout. Check. The catering isn't set yet. Check. There are staffing problems. Check. We haven't done good promotion. Check. 2 department heads asked for it to be postponed. Check. If we postpone, we can promote it in the e-newsletter. You see, this outline is very sparse. No Roman numerals or letters or even numbers, but it's a jotting down of the major topics to cover in the email, and it took about 45 seconds to do. The writer can go ahead and create a draft from this outline, or he can revise the outline a bit, taking into consideration his reader's potential response. Say that the boss isn't going to be happy about this suggestion. Let's also say that Some of the reasons for the delay aren't going to reflect well on the writer himself. The boss is likely to wonder why he hasn't done good promotion and why he hasn't finalized the catering arrangements. Reordering the outline can improve his chances of getting a good response from his boss. Check. Let's postpone till May. Check. 2 department heads asked for it to be postponed. Check. Some logistical problems. Check. If we postpone, we can promote it in the e-newsletter. Check. May would be better because we'd get a better turnout. With this new outline, the writer is less likely to get resistance from his boss. He leads with his most persuasive point, that the 2 department heads have requested the postponement. He buries some of the information that might make him look bad in the single heading about logistical problems, and he ends on a promising note, that postponing will allow more time for better promotion and yield a better turnout. All of this organizing took no more than a couple of minutes well spent on solving a big problem and staving off a bad response from the reader. The writer is ready now to write a draft, and because of this outline, he knows where he's going. Reverse outlining. Few things are more interesting than revising. Having seen what you said, you begin to discover what you meant. It's like psychoanalysis, except it's free. Zibby O'Neill, novelist. Do you have to write an outline before you start writing your draft? No, not if it doesn't work well for you. Many writers prefer to start writing a draft and then do what we call reverse outlining. When you reverse outline, you take a draft you've already written and jot down a brief outline of what you actually have. You can make notes paragraph by paragraph or idea by idea. Reverse outlining can help you see if your draft is really organized in a sensible way, or if you need to go back and reorder things a bit. It can also expose any gaps you might have in your information, gaps that you can fill in by brainstorming additional content. Draft. Drafting is the process of sitting down and getting it all written out for the first time. Conventional wisdom suggests that you should start drafting only after you've carefully brainstormed and outlined your content. However, most people ignore conventional wisdom and start their writing process by jumping right in and writing a draft. There are lots of reasons people do this. Sometimes we're in a big rush, and writing an outline seems like a waste of time. Sometimes we think we know exactly what to say, so we start off by just saying it. In spite of what your English teachers may have told you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with starting by writing a draft. If you want to start writing, start writing. There's also some practical support for this approach, as many writers find that the process of writing helps them generate new ideas. Just be aware that if you start writing a draft before you've given any thought to your purpose or your reader, and before you've really brainstormed your content, you're probably going to have to do some major revising. If that works well for you, then you shouldn't hesitate to proceed. The great irony about drafting is that although most people start here, it's probably the most anxiety-producing part of the entire writing process. Drafting can create worry because it's so near the end of the process, and we put ourselves under a lot of pressure to get it right the first time. Of course, we've already seen that getting it right the first time is unlikely. So how can we reduce the anxiety associated with drafting and work through the cycle of the writing process efficiently and effectively? If you've started a draft, my best advice is to keep going until you feel stuck, or until you have serious questions about what you're doing. You know you're going to have to go back and take another look at it, so relax and keep going. If you come across an area where there's something missing, flag it and keep going. If you're writing on a computer, mark the section with all caps or italics, or put it in a different color. If you're writing by hand, underline it, or mark it with stars or question marks. Once you're on a roll, use that momentum and keep going as long as you can. How do you know when it's time to stop and think? Signs that you're having problems include wondering, why the heck am I writing this? Or, is this relevant? Or thinking, this stinks. If you find you've hit the wall, stop and take a break. Go over what you've written and check it by going around the spinner. Is your purpose clear? Will it appeal to your reader? Do you have all the content you need, or do you need to brainstorm more? Is it organized effectively? Work on the areas that seem skimpy or weak to you, and then go back and fill in. Convince yourself that you are working in clay, not marble, on paper, not eternal bronze. Let that first sentence be as stupid as it wishes. No one will rush out and print it as it stands. Just put it down. Then another. Jacques Barzun, historian and essayist. Too often I wait for the sentence to finish taking shape in my mind before setting it down. It is better to seize it by the end that first offers itself, head or foot, though not knowing the rest, then pull. The rest will follow along. André Gide, novelist. Revise. The perfect first draft is almost as rare as a sunny day in Vancouver or a polar bear in Florida. It happens, but not very often. Revising is part of the writing process. It's not a sign of failure. Regardless of the writing project you're working on, you should plan time to revise your drafts. Revising can mean anything from doing a complete rethink and rewrite to simply proofreading and fixing typos. The extent of the revising you do depends on a few things: how long the document is, how complicated it is, and how important it is. Whatever it is, you need to give it at least a quick proofread before you let it out of your sight. Spending just a few seconds to proofread your document can help prevent costly misunderstandings. Imagine, for example, that you've written a letter requesting a postponement in your jury duty service, and you've written this sentence: I will be available to serve until June 21st of this year. That sounds all right, right? The trouble is that you won't be available to serve until June 21st. What you meant to write was this: I will not be available to serve until June 21st of this year. You dropped out one little word, not, didn't proofread, and sent off the wrong information to the clerk of the court. It's going to take far longer to untangle this mess than it would have taken to proofread the letter before you sent it. Even email should be proofread. You may feel it's an unreasonable hassle to proofread personal emails, but failing to do so can have annoying and time-consuming consequences. Once, I sent out an email to 20 friends inviting them to dinner at a restaurant at 3 p.m. on Tuesday, April 17th. 11 people wrote me back, asking if I was really proposing to have dinner at 3 in the afternoon. I had to send out a correction. The invitation should have been for 7. I'd wasted my time and my friends' time, and it would all have been very easy to avoid had I taken a moment to proofread my message before I sent it. The stakes become much higher when we email at work. Sending an email that contains typos will at best make you look unprofessional. The consequences of sending out the wrong information can be more serious. We'll look at e-communication in greater detail in the next chapter. For now, it's enough to remember to proofread. For documents that are longer and more complex, you'll want to go beyond proofreading and really think critically about your draft before you revise it. Here is a useful list of questions to ask yourself as you review and revise. Check. Is it clear what I'm trying to accomplish here? If I'm asking for something, have I asked clearly? Check. Do I address the readers appropriately? Check. Do I give the readers enough information to act on my request? Is that information interesting or inspiring to them? Does it motivate them to act? Check. Is my information complete? Have I left out anything important? Check. Is the information presented in a logical and compelling order? Check. Is my document free from errors in spelling, punctuation, and grammar? You have to allow yourself the liberty of writing poorly. You have to get the bulk of it done, and then you start to refine it. You have to put down less than marvelous material just to keep going to whatever you think the end is going to be, which may be something else altogether by the time you get there. Larry Gelbart, scriptwriter. Revise in passes. For long and very important documents, some people like to revise in passes. That is, they go through the document several times, each time checking for a different question above. It can be difficult to keep all these questions in your head at once, and dividing the task into its component parts can make it less overwhelming. You can develop your own set of questions and your own way of working through them. The key is to find a way to make the task as comfortable and efficient as possible for you. Enlist help. No matter how conscientious you are, it's very easy to lose perspective on something you've just written. When you comb through a draft immediately after you've written it, you're likely to miss problems. Having another person review your draft, even very quickly, is an excellent way to solve this "I'm too close to it" problem and get a different perspective on your writing. Sometimes co-workers develop a buddy system whereby they regularly check one another's writing. People who work together this way build trust and can significantly improve each other's work. If you're asking someone for help for the first time, be sure you let him know exactly what you need. If you're just looking for a quick proofread, for instance, let your reader know that before he spends an hour developing a detailed critique of your content. If you have any specific questions about what you've just written, for instance, if you're worried it might not appeal to the reader, or if you think the introduction is too long, be sure to tell your editor so he can focus on the areas where you need help. One must be ruthless with one's own writing, or someone else will be. John Berryman, poet. To reach your readers, get feedback first. When Mark Victor Hansen and I started to work on the first of our Chicken Soup for the Soul books, we knew we wanted to create a book that would touch and inspire our readers with unforgettable stories. We had collected a lot of stories, and we wanted to choose the ones that would mean the most to our readers. How did we choose? Through reader feedback. We selected a group of 40 reviewers and asked them to rate every story on a scale from 7 to 10. A 10 is a great story that gives the reader goosebumps, a 9 is a good story with a great message, an 8 is an okay story that lacks emotional punch, and a 7 is a flat-out rejection. We sent each of our readers a letter explaining the feedback process and letting them know that it would be their input that would make the final book meaningful to readers. From the results, we created an Excel spreadsheet and averaged all the scores, which showed us exactly how all our reviewers felt about every story we were considering. We've used the same feedback process for each of the nearly 250 Chicken Soup titles. Today, there are over 500 million copies of the Chicken Soup books in print, and I firmly believe that wouldn't have happened without the feedback our many reviewers provided. That's an important lesson for anyone writing anything for any audience. So the next time you're writing something that's very important to you, something that has to have a real impact on your readers, make the effort to get feedback on your writing before you finalize it. If you can get feedback from people who are similar to your intended readers, your message will truly reach and touch its audience. Jack Canfield is the best-selling co-creator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series of books. He is also co-author, with Janet Switzer, of The Success Principles, How to Get From Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. Take a break. In an ideal world, you'll have time to write a draft and then take a break before you review it. Letting a day or two pass between drafts is an excellent way to gain some perspective on what you've just written. Unfortunately, the demands of the real world often make this difficult. Even under harried circumstances, though, it's often possible to let that draft rest long enough to improve your revision process. Say, for instance, that the document has to be done by close of business today. If your schedule allows, plan to write a draft first thing in the morning, let it rest through lunch, and then return to it later in the afternoon. Even a span of a few hours can help you take a fresh approach to the document. If you've had a colleague proofing your draft in the meantime, you'll be in even better shape when you return to the document to revise it. Speed and the spinner. As we've seen, the spinner approach to the writing process gives you a lot of freedom to work in the way that's most productive for you. Using the spinner, you can start your writing process anywhere you like and work through the process in the way that works best for you. We all learn to do things in the most efficient and comfortable way for us. Folding laundry, preparing a meal, making a purchase decision, we have a preferred process for anything we do regularly, whether or not we've thought consciously about that process. The spinner approach frees you to find and develop your own process for writing. However, any kind of systematic approach to writing is bound to seem a little idealized to people who have to write in the real world. Whether you see the process as a line or as a circle, going through all these steps may seem like an impossible luxury to people who are under the gun to do a lot of writing fast every day. In both our personal and professional lives, the pace of communication is increasing, and the notion of stopping to think may seem like little more than a charming fantasy. I think I can offer some comfort here. The more you interact with the spinner, the more the process will become ingrained in your everyday mode of working. The more exposure you have to it, the more you will begin to use it. Even unconsciously, you'll become more aware of your purpose and your reader. You'll be more conscientious about the content you include. You'll begin to think instinctively about outlining, and your drafting and revising skills will improve. By working the spinner approach, even occasionally, you'll figure out your optimal writing process, the one that allows you to write quickly and effectively, which is bound to be more efficient than any process handed to you by others. The spinner approach to writing has yet another advantage over the linear step-by-step approach. It's ideal to use for a quick check when you really don't have much time to plan and revise. You can dash off a draft and then take yourself once or twice around the spinner to check that you haven't forgotten something important. You can even use it literally as a spinner to select an area to work on at random, knowing that focusing attention on that area is bound to improve the document you're working on, and also, over the long run, make you a better writer across the board. The spinner is yours to play with and to use as you like. It includes everything you need to know about writing. It's purposely designed to be flexible, to help you find the best possible writing process for yourself, and to help you get your writing done within your time constraints. You'll see the spinner icon return throughout the book as we discuss different kinds of writing tasks and look at examples, both successful and unsuccessful. I hope it will open the door for you to an approach to writing that's sensible, straightforward, and comfortable.